This is Bob Balch from Fu Manchu, and you're watching Aftershock TV.
All right, so let's go on to our last segment this week. I know, Tom, you had it. This was your idea to come up with this. This is something I always love talking about because I can never name enough of these bands. But why don't you go ahead and start this one?
Yeah, and it's always subjective. So Matt and I, we just shoot the shit every week and say, hey, what's next week's segments? And one of the bands, or one of the subject matters I want to talk about is bands, in my opinion, and everybody's opinion is going to be totally different. And that's what the fun of the show is, that basically should have been bigger. And then we can talk about who the bands are. Obviously, we don't want to talk, ad nauseum about the same bands, but who the bands are, in my opinion, and maybe a line or two as to why weren't they bigger? Like, what happened? Was it bad management? Was it bad timing? Was it infighting? Whatever it is. And we'll all agree to disagree, and that's okay. And I'll shoot through mine pretty quickly. I won't have to talk too long about it. I've got a couple here, and no particular order here, but one of my first ones are Saxon. Saxon were hugely influential in the new wave of British heavy metal back in, particularly 1980 with Wheels of Steel and obviously Denim and Leather and Strong Arm of the Law and Power and the Glory. They were the glory years. And like they came out at the same time as Tigers of Pantang, Saxon, Maiden, Diamond Head, Def Leppard, and obviously we know what happened to some of those bands, and maybe I'll mention them too. But I think Saxon had the glory years of those 4 years. They were a big band. They were selling out what Maiden, like the Nottingham Rock City and Hammersmith Odeon. They were playing the same venues as Maiden for maybe 2 or 3 years. The Number of the Beast came out, and then the world changed for them. But Saxon, I think, were the band that never quite had the management. And I think Biff even said that, he get asked that probably all the time. And he said, we never had a Rod Smallwood. And I think that was one of the things that killed him. And then they chased it too much. After Power and the Glory, they started going off the American sound and the, Crusader and stuff like that, which is awful album. The song Crusader is phenomenal, but I think the album is terrible. And they just kept going for there. And then they came back and, metal back up again. I know their latest, last 15 years, actually since about late 2000 and maybe 7, 08, they're just stellar. Their music is fantastic. Just relentlessly good. Our new album is brilliant again, and I know you've interviewed Biff before, Rich. Jumping around a little bit, Diamond Head. I was a huge Diamond Head fan back in the day. Their first few albums, Lightning, To the Nations, Borrowed Time, Canterbury killed them. I think they tried to go all Zeppelin-y and shit. Right when they were on the crest of a wave, launching into the new wave of British heavy metal, Canterbury came out, which I actually think is a phenomenal record. I love it. And they're just another band that just kind of infighting and never lost their way. With Sean Harris, they had a Robert Plant-esque brilliant singer, Brian Tatler. We know he's obviously back on with Judas Priest right now. I'll jump around a little bit. And no order here. Black Country Communion, I think they're a band that gets lost. I think they're a great brand. Dead Daisies, Y&T. There's a prime example of why the fuck didn't they make it. Like, I'm looking up their stats. They sold 4 million albums over 12 studios. It's nothing, right? I mean, Dr.
Okay, still not that bad though. It's not
awful. I mean, over 12 studio albums, they just never quite. They were like
true.
They were arguably second or third tier on a sales wise, but influential, like you mentioned, Richie, with the trash bands. Metal Church, another band that just for me should have made it. Annihilator, I think, were one of those almost like forgotten trash bands.
Totally.
Jeff Waters is arguably as good as Dave Mustaine, and their last couple of releases have just been just stellar trash albums. 3 they're going to finish out on is Montrose. Never quite know why they didn't quite do it, considering how good their albums even are today, with Sammy Hagar and the Ted Templeman production. Motorhead. Like, Motorhead were never a big band. I don't think they ever sold arenas. Maybe in a couple of European festivals they got big, and I think Steve Hammersmith went to number 1 in the UK. So they had like a window of a couple of years, but I think they never really got beyond a club theater band. And I'm going to finish on Rainbow. Rainbow just never quite got there. They were big to a point, and they had their, obviously, the Dio years, and then they had the peak years with like I Surrender and obviously the Joe Lynn Turner and Graham Bonnet years for a couple of years, because Richie Blackmore went after the pop song, he went after the hits.
Street of Dreams and stuff.
Yeah. And I'm a huge Rainbow fan. I like all their shit, but I think they're just a band that they're a legacy band mentioned in a lot of comments, but they just never got to they never
Mhm.
sold 20,000 tickets a night. They were never that band, as good as
Mhm.
they were and the legacy that they left. So that's just I could go on all night about this, but I just wanted to pick kind of 7 or 8 to touch on.
Nice. Just before we pass to Richie, I just want to comment, with the YNT and with the Saxon. I think with those bands, I think you kind of said it, Tom, before. I think also those bands, when by the time they kind of came over here, at least, I mean, this is, like I said, like Saxon and really never broke huge here in the States.
Hmm.
And I think it's the same thing. It's just sort of like by the time they were trying to, like you said, yeah, they lightened up things, and they were just a little bit. I hate to say it, but that was also the time of MTV. They didn't have the looks,
Nope.
and if you don't have the looks and you don't have the style at that point, you're a little bit older. It just wasn't going to. I mean, like I said, a lot of bands, we talk about Thin Lizzy, did the same thing, and they couldn't break it over here as much either.
Sure.
Um,
Actually, I never
yeah.
mentioned Lizzie. Fuck.
Oh man, but and Y&T just quickly on it's the same kind of thing because Y&T was really getting it going in LA and everything. Like, you just remember watching Bob's, documentaries, was really the mid to later 70s.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, you said by the time Summertime Girls came out, these guys were old already.
Yeah.
I just think with both Saxon and Y&T, I like those bands, but there was just something that just I think maybe like I said, I think a lot of it just had to do with the MTV era. They just didn't have
Oh yeah.
the looks, and maybe just like you said, they tried with Summertime Girls. It did, it did okay, but it didn't really, it didn't break it for them. But it is funny because yes, Y&T is like revered by everybody. I mean, that's really in in the industry. I mean, journalists and everything clamor
Yeah.
about them, but they
Did
just
Y&T ever
never.
have a platinum album? Did it ever reach
No.
platinum
I
status?
no, I don't think so. No,
Yeah, see, there you
you
go. I
know.
mean, I think in Rock We Trust was their biggest, I think, but like they never
Mhm.
hit 1 million albums. Think about that. Like that was
No.
almost like that was easy for a Warrant or a Slaughter to hit 1 million records. That was almost a
Yeah.
failure if that's all you did, and they never did it. You know, it
And
was
I
such a
think
shame.
they did have some money behind them too. I don't think it was like they were because I remember they were all in all over the magazines. I remember they had like that sort of their mascot, like an Eddie type of thing. It was like a
That's right.
robot,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So they did have some stuff behind them. It just I don't, I guess I think they were just more of a 70s type of band where a lot of the like people my age just weren't really in the 80s, 5 or 6 years younger than, after you guys were listening to them. It just didn't, like I said, everything was Motley Crue and Poison. And so if you weren't going to look or sound like that at the time, there
Yeah.
was no, no one was going to pump you. No one was going to push you. You
And
had
even
to,
their last
you
album,
know,
Y&T's last album, Face Melter, I think it was 2010. That's a great album. Like
Yeah.
they just
Mhm.
didn't really release bad albums. They just never had the
Mhm.
big one. I think they just kind of got lost in the shuffle. So
yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
Mhm.
All right, Richie, you're up.
Well, the one thing I will say, Tommy, is that I'm not going to repeat any of the bands you had.
There's a few in there, I guess, right?
Yeah. I'm going to start with Riot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Far
Goddamn.
Down Under is one of
Totally.
the best metal albums.
Shit, that's a great one. I missed that.
Yeah, I have that here on my list. Yep. Mhm.
It is a fantastic album.
And their new stuff is
yeah.
good too, by the way.
Good too. Yeah.
Yeah, I know they had issues with, like a lot of bands, different singers and stuff like that, but there's a lot of quality there, and they never broke. The second one, Tommy, you mentioned it yesterday. I'm a massive King's X fan.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Sure.
I've been in on them since the beginning.
That's
and
right. I remember.
One of the things that Tommy might remember was the journalist Mick Wall had this TV show called Monsters of Rock.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to review albums every week on the show. And I'll never forget that the two albums he reviewed on 1 week's show was he had King's X and the new Poison record. Now, there's two different sounding albums that you'll ever hear. So that'll tell you the market that they were coming into in 88.
Yeah.
They sounded like nobody else. Everybody raved about them who got them. And they were kind of, I think the label had a difficulty with, right, who are we going to put him out with on tour? Because a couple of years later, I saw him with AC/DC. They ended up touring with Motley Crue, with John Corabi. I think they did shows with Scorpions.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
Yeah, they were all over the map. And because the music was all over the map. And I think that they were so unique that, a lot, they didn't cross over a lot. You had to really invest in a band like that.
Yeah.
True, you do.
It's a good one.
Yeah, no, it is a good one. And just quick on that, it is a great point. I think and you're right. I think a lot of it was, I mean, so they were on Metal Blade, right? So Metal Blade was really known for more of the thrash stuff. And then I remember when I first heard King's X, they were pumping them all over Headbangers Ball, MTV, but they were mixing them in with all these thrash bands. And so it was like there was no way to really find that market for them, because like you said, they were all like so unique, and they were heavy but not super heavy. They were soft but not too soft. They were just so different. Like I said, they had almost like a Beatles vibe to them, along with heavy rock and some metal. And it was just always a challenge for. I didn't really get at first. I when I first heard them, like, what is this band? Like, I can't stand them. A couple of years later, when I really, like you said, I invested listening to them more. And once I heard, okay, well, Doug Pinnick's got a really awesome voice, and then I wound up loving him. And so, but yeah, on the first hear, it wasn't like one of those bands you first hear, at least for me, where it was like, oh, they blew you away. It really did take, like you said, you had to invest, you had to really give it a sit down and really listen to it to really understand it. And, just the way people, I guess, just listen to music, their listening habits, a lot of people just don't tend to do that. So they just had a hard time, in my opinion, just, getting that wider audience, because of the labels didn't know what to do with them. Exactly. They were talented as hell,
Richie, did we see them in Dublin? I'm trying to remember.
With AC/DC.
We did. That's right.
Yeah, they opened for AC/DC. Now there's an audience to try and get over playing King's X music, and
yeah. Come on. Yeah,
I know because I've interviewed some of the King's X guys. That was a really hard tour for them, especially in the likes of Germany. I think Doug Pinnick or Ty Tabor told me that there was coins thrown at them, lighters.
Wow.
Someone threw a toilet brush at him.
Oh man.
So the next band is and I'm still a fan, and I was a massive fan back in the 80s. Dan Reed Network.
I knew you were going to mention them. Yeah,
they had a major label. They had Q Prime. They had Bruce Fairburn producing in Little Mountain Sound. Kerrang raved about them.
That's right.
I think what killed Dan Reed in the end was they were labeled as a cross between Bon Jovi and Prince, and Bon Jovi brought them out on the I think it was the New Jersey tour, and they never made it, and I could never understand why. And another one of the reasons that they said they never made it was he shaved his head. That'll tell you how image conscious a lot of fans
I
were.
remember that, because he used to have this, like, he was a good looking dude. He had really, like, literally waist length hair, like Sebastian Bach, like long black hair. So Kerrang loved him for that reason. Like, he was the pretty boy and all that kind of shit. And then I remember the Star cover where he just shaved his head completely bald.
And the label were like, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and within 6 months or a year, they were finished.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah. The next band I have is Lion. Cal Swan. I think their debut album was amazing. I know Bob Nalbandian was a massive fan of that album. I just think the sound they had on it he had a great singer in Cal, Doug Aldridge, young hotshot guitar player on the up and up, and the bands he played with since.
Sunset Strip Band too. You could have named them on your Sunset Strip Bands.
True. But they were on Grand Slam Records, which was not a label to be on. And I've interviewed Doug and I've interviewed Jerry Best, and they said they were an absolute nightmare to deal with.
That was the Jersey label, I think, at a New Jersey Grand Slam, right? I believe. Yeah.
And they had a second album, Trouble in Angel City, and then they were finished.
Yeah, that's right.
They should have been a lot bigger, but they were on the wrong label.
Yeah, when I went to that Adrian Vandenberg gig a couple of weeks ago, I think I sent the picture, Rich. There was a guy in front of me with a lion T-shirt on. It's probably the only Lion T-shirt ever bought ever. I mean, not that I'm anything, but I was probably the only guy in the audience going, "Fucking Lion!" Like, I was looking at this Lion T-shirt, going, "God damn!" Yeah. So anyway, I should have went over to him and just said something, but whatever.
The next band I have on, you just mentioned him, Vandenberg.
Yeah.
The first couple of albums are amazing.
Fantastic.
Adrian Vandenberg's career, to me, he's made a lot of fantastic music, and he's more known for Whitesnake. But when you look at his Whitesnake career,
Small.
He played on the '87 tour. Only played the guitar solo on "Here I Go Again." Wrote "Slip of the Tongue" and never played on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they did the "Restless Heart" album in '97, they weren't on a major label in England or in the US, and the album didn't do anything. So he's been in Whitesnake for a long time, but he's more known in Whitesnake for playing songs that he didn't write. But even the newer stuff, Vandenberg's Moon Kings and the new Vandenberg stuff is fantastic.
The new album is brilliant. I gotta
Yeah.
be honest. When I saw that, when I heard it first, the singer, I couldn't. The songs were brilliant. I think the songs are they're just kind of white snaky, just good hard rock songs. But I didn't quite get the singer. He has kind of this growl about him. When I went to see him 3 weeks ago, I went back and listened to the album. I said, "No, I kind of get it." So it put me off personally a little bit. But the new album is brilliant. But I can say about Vandenberg, a great call out there is that he still has the chops. He was never a shredder like a Paul Gilbert type player, and he was never that player. And he's very shy. He says nothing on stage, just says hello and walks back and does his thing. But I don't know how old he is now. 60, I guess. I don't know how old. Oh Jesus!
Wow, 70. Wow,
he
that's
looks
crazy.
good for that. He's still got the hair. It's not even that gray. Obviously, some help there, but having seen, I was again being a fanboy when Adrian Vandenberg walked out on stage. I was going, "Fuck me! I'm looking at Adrian Vandenberg. When am I ever going to get to see this again?" Seriously, I got caught in the moment, and he was brilliant. And he's 70 years of age, and he was fantastic in his 70s. So, tip of the hat to him. Great call out there, Richie.
Yeah, here's one a little bit left field. Anthrax with John Bush should have been bigger.
Oh yeah, I love that.
The Sound of White Noise got a lot of great praise, but the 4 albums John did with him, I think, are all either really good or fantastic. I think the Sound of White Noise is fantastic. I think We've Come for You All is the last one.
That's the best one. Yeah, that's
amazing,
the best one.
Amazing record.
I agree.
And the 2 in between are really good as well. I remember I caught the Stomp 442 tour in Dublin. And at the time, they were still on, I believe it was Elektra. And the tour was badly promoted. I remember going to the SFX in Dublin, and you've been there, Tommy. There was probably 100 people at the show.
Ooh, that's small.
Yeah, it was terrible. But the band were fantastic. That album was really good. And they're like some of these bands now that, they change singers, and it's like Hagar with Van Halen when they got back at Roth. All that era gets ignored. And Anthrax now are back with Joey, and they might slip in Only every now and again as the Tom Bush song, but there's so much good material on this.
I agree.
And the last one I have, and the band became big, but I think they really should have had a bigger career, is Europe. The Final Countdown, a lot of people know Europe from the Final Countdown, and that album sold a lot and it was a worldwide hit. But really, when you look at that band's career and look at their discography, there's so much more to them than just that album and that song.
Fantastic, man.
Their earlier stuff is more, European metal kind of, not as poppy. And their later stuff that they brought out since they reformed is a lot like Deep Purple. It's just amazing. And they're a band that are really big in around the world, outside the US now. They're still a big draw. But for a lot of people in the US, it's that's the Final Countdown.
Yeah, Final Countdown. So I can think about. Yeah,
and a lot we've seen Europe a couple of times over the years. We did. That was my track of the week a few weeks ago. The new album, the new song, I think, is a great song. I saw them a few times, but their latest. If you listen to their sound, it's very Deep Purple, Rainbow, Lizzie influence, just good old fashioned 70s groovy rock. It's not metal. They're just a great band. And if you ever watch Joey Tempest in an interview, he's just a good dude. Just talks about the scene and whatever. And he's just a rock fan today. You can tell he's just a rock fan today. Good lyricist, and he still has the pipes. So his voice is still there. Looking forward to the new release. So that's a great call out, Richie. Yeah, band that they got the big hit, and then they kind of people don't think they even exist anymore, and they're still probably playing to decent crowds in Europe and beyond.
Yeah, that's my list.
Good list.
All right, very cool. Yeah. All right, I'll go ahead and do mine. I'm gonna start like in the 70s. Like I said, you mentioned Montrose. I had as them as one, Tom. There's a couple others. Some of those proto metal bands I was a huge fan of, like Captain Beyond. I thought they.
I don't know
same
them at
thing.
all. No, I don't know them.
Okay, they featured. It was with Rod Evans. The old Deep Purple vocalist.
All right.
He was in it. Yeah, check out their first, self-titled record. It's
Okay.
freaking great. They had 2 really solid records. After that, they kind of changed up the lineup. Rod Evans quit, and they weren't the same. But those first 2 records are, proto metal staples. I mean, like them and like Mountain were really the 2 bands that really kind of kicked off, metal here in the States, in my opinion. The other one I have one from the 70s is the band Dusts. I don't know if you guys ever heard of them at all.
Just the name.
Okay. Check them out too. It featured, I know, Kenny Aronson, the bassist. He's been with like Billy Idol, Billy Squire, bunch of bands. He was in there. And Marky Ramone, the drummer from the Ramones, was in it too. Good old hard rocks, like I said, sort of proto metal stuff. Good stuff. Then I have a new wave of British heavy metal. I thought Witchfinder General was a very underrated band.
Dang.
Love those 2 records that they put out. Same thing. A lot of these bands they only had, I think one of the reasons why they were kind of under the radar is because they only put out 2 records. And especially back then, that just wasn't enough, right? Bands were putting out a record every year. And so, but yeah, Witchfinder General, I thought was they really kind of kickstarted Doom, after Black Sabbath, in my opinion, And then here in the States, the band Trouble out of Chicago is a great band. That doesn't get talked about enough too. The singer Eric Wagner, great singer, great front man. Like I said, I remember, I think they were on Metal Blade, and they were trying to term them. A lot of times at that point you had a lot of the Venom and Slayer with they did black metal stuff, and they were trying to term Trouble as white metal. I mean, they tried to market them as white metal because they had like biblical quotes or something in some of their stuff. It didn't stick, obviously. It was pretty stupid, but yeah, Trouble was a great band. And we just talked about Cliff Burton before. The first band he was in, Trauma, before he joined Metallica.
Right, Trauma, yeah.
They've got one album out on Shrapnel. It's a great record called Scratch and Scream. Check that out. And that wasn't with him. He wasn't on that record. He already left Metallica. But I think he might have been on some of those songs. He might have helped. I think written some of the songs, and great record. Trauma. I had Riot on there too, as Richie had. Now in LA, the Sunset Strip. One band I forgot to mention, and I have him on here, but I forgot to mention him in the Sunset Strip. And Badlands. Love Badlands.
Yeah. Dang.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously the first record, the self-titled, was great, but Voodoo Highway, there's a track called Whiskey Dust, and that shit's so heavy. Mean, it's so bad. Too bad what happened to them. You know what I mean? Because they were a great band. Dangerous Toys was another band I really liked. From that era as well. They had their one hit, the Teasing and Pleasing, but Jason McMaster is an awesome vocalist. Great guy to talk to too. Thrash metal, Tom, Annihilator. I know you mentioned them earlier. I think they're super underrated. There's another couple bands, thrash. Nuclear Assault, big Nuclear Assault fan. I love them, and Wargasm. I mean, they only had, I think, the 1 or 2 albums in Boston, obviously. Bob Mayo, obviously, he's been on Skull Sessions a bunch of times with Bob. That's a great band and record, and unfortunately, that band got screwed. Just label stuff. They were on it was basically a rap label they were on that signed about 4 metal bands, hardcore crossover bands, metal bands, and didn't do anything with them. And I think that's unfortunate because that Wargasm, Why Play Around is the name of the album. Great. Another band, this is my last band that I thought was great. That I think it was just more of a timing thing when they came out around 89 and 90 was Rat Child America. And you guys don't know if you know them at all.
Yeah, we knew the English Rat Child. Yeah.
Okay. They were originally called Rat Child, and they had to switch it because of the English. Yeah. So they had to call it Rat Child America. Check those guys out. Yeah, they wound up becoming in the 90s. After that, they changed their name to Souls at Zero, and they had a couple, like 3 albums out, which were really good. It was more groove metal stuff, but they had Shannon Larkin, who's obviously the drummer for Godsmack and Ugly Kid Joe and whatever. He was on there. Brad Divins, who played with Kicks, was on there in Wrathchild America as well. Yeah, I just thought that once again, that was a great band that just when they came out, thrash metal was starting to go down, and obviously that's when grunge started coming in, and then they had to kind of switch up their sound. So, those are those are the bands I had. Those are all
I had a
mine,
slight caveat at the end about some of the southern rock bands, which I'm a huge fan of, like Blackfoot, 38 Special, Molly
Oh
Hatchet.
yeah.
Would they ever like they're great? I love those bands. Were they big
So,
over here, Matt? Would they
yeah,
like back
yeah.
in the day? Would they make that? Were they in
38
the
Special was really big. They had some top 40 hits that were, they had one or two songs in MTV. I mean, they were, unfortunately, I think the biggest song, well, not the biggest, but they had a pretty poppy, real like ballady, real slow song called Second Chance. I think that it's kind of like skewed what they were doing in the early 80s. But yeah, Hang On, Hold On Loosely, and a couple of other songs. Yeah, they were big here. Molly Hatchet was in the 70s, but more with like the real music fans, not really radio. Molly, like my dad had like all those albums, so I remember, I grew up, listening to that stuff too. Blackfoot, same thing. Them and Molly Hatchet were in. There's this band called the Outlaws too. They were all, like I said, it was all that really good southern rock. Was it Black Oak, Arkansas? Was another one.
Yeah, great.
A lot of these, southern rock bands. It's just when Skynyrd, took over, it was just everything was Skynyrd. And then I think you said 38 Special obviously did pretty well because they were, related. There was a Van Zant in the band, so they were related to Skynyrd. They were the biggest of all those bands. Yeah.
Blackfoot is a band like in. Go ahead, Richie.
How big here were Triumph?
It's interesting too. I know them. Once again, it's interesting because I know these bands just because, like I said, my dad was a huge record. So he had old Triumph records. I knew them well. I wouldn't say they were huge though. I mean, once again, the real, rock music fans that collected records knew obviously the Triumphs and the Molly Hatchets. Yeah, they were fans of them. But same thing, radio, not huge. No, I mean, like I said, they obviously it was just all Rush. You know what I mean? There wasn't enough room, I think, for another.
Matt, that bands like whether it's Blackfoot or Triumph is a good one, that they were big in pockets. Like UFO were big in the Chicago area and big in the Midwest.
Yes.
They never broke it in the West Coast. So we're thinking of a Bon Jovi that were just big everywhere. A lot of those bands were big and they could play 20,000 seats in Chicago, but then play 1,000 seats in LA or something. So they had their areas, their fan base.
Yeah, no, it's a good. It's actually a great point. You're right. Like, like I read this last year. I met this guy. I was just in this town here on the coast, and this guy he set up a table on this avenue in this town, out here. It's a nice little like vacation-y town, and I'm like, what's this guy? He had a table, and I just saw this big thing of Tom Petty. Right? I'm like, what is this? So I went over to him. And he was a friend of Tom Petty. He wrote a book on Tom Petty. He was a friend of his, but he was also like a radio guy in the business. That's how he met Tom Petty. He basically helped break Tom Petty and John Cougar Mellencamp, pretty much, this guy. And I read this book that he put out about it. It was really a great read. So much, not even so much if you like Tom Petty or not, but he really went over how it all works, with how bands broke. And like you said, that's how it really would start was, they would call them, I think, the radio pitchmen, or there was a certain term for them. And exactly, certain markets would you get records and spin. Like Tom Petty, I think, was like known in like Boston, I think San Francisco, and someplace in the South, right? That was like the three markets that were playing them, but it wasn't connecting everywhere else. And then these radio guys, their job was to kind of like, get them now into the other cities. Yeah. So you're right. A lot of them would just naturally break in certain areas, certain cities. But it didn't mean, it broke everywhere. It really wasn't until MTV took that all away, because then everything was just through MTV because everybody could see it. Everyone could hear it, and that's how bands started breaking in the 80s. But the 70s, it was all about the different markets. And like you said, some places they did well. A lot of places they didn't. And the ones that really did well everywhere, obviously, were the ones that,
Well, if Eddie Trunk is watching this and we didn't mention UFO as being an underrated band, he'll have a heart attack. But whatever.
You're right. We didn't because they are.
Yes,
that's a great one.
I would put them in there. I mean, I'm a UFO fan. I discovered UFO way later. Like we were, my early influence was like Saxon, Lizzie, AC/DC, and then obviously the hair metal scene came in and off it took from there. But UFO were never in the mix. I just never got them. Never, not that I didn't like them. I just never gave them time. And then maybe 10, 15 years ago, I said, fuck, these are actually a really good band. I went back.
I think, Tommy, when we were, when I was getting into metal about 86 or 87, UFO or whatever lineup they had, they were a bit of a joke. It was more, I think it was just
Really?
Phil
Copyright, yeah.
and whatever. I think he might have, the Misdemeanor album might have come out with,
Yeah.
he's got a Atomic Tommy M or something on guitar. It's
Mm.
actually a good it's actually a good album, but they'd glammed up the look, they'd poofed up the hair.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't really anything like the Schenker era or even the Paul Raymond era.
Mm.
And then of course Pete was doing his Wasted thing with Paul Raymond, and they'd got Danny Vaughan in '86, and they were going for the
Yeah.
American market as well. So you know,
Taikedo, yeah, I remember that.
I
Yeah.
think all their classic stuff was like 7 or 8 years before we were even
Yeah.
into their music.
Yeah.
So when we got into them, it was like, oh, no, I'm into Rat now, and I'm into Dokken, and I'm into, you know, all these newer bands. It's like UFO. Actually, they're old hat.
Same with, I think it was the same with Lizzie. Like Lizzie were, you know, obviously they broke in '83, but they broke just as the scene was taken off. And, you know, we mentioned that before, Matt, when, you know, Phil heard Pyromania, he said, well, I'm fucked. I can't compete with this, you know. But did he know, like, well, maybe he did know that the influence that Lizzie had on Def Leppard personally, but I think it's just a changing of the guard a little bit. And then, you know, and then journalists and magazines, they'll just latch on to whoever's selling the most, and they'll just put, you know, the same people on the cover every 6 weeks because that's what sells magazines. And as a result, that we, you know, the public just keep on say, okay, well, this is popular, let's go for it. So, but then I think as you get older, I know, Richie, you're not a huge Pink Floyd fan. I would never give it a
No.
band like Pink Floyd a minute back in the day, not a minute. Now, they're one of my probably top 10 bands.